And here we are in the studio with AC Crispin. Welcome back to Fast Forward.
Oh, thank you, Mike.
It was a while since you've been here. Yeah, it's been
Yeah,
a while.
We've just been talking about that. It has been indeed a while.
Yeah. Now, your latest book is very interesting. It's a media kind of tie-in book. It's a Pirates of the Caribbean book called The Price of Freedom.
That's right.
And it's a prequel. It's the backstory for Captain Jack Sparrow.
It is the backstory for Captain Jack Sparrow. Yes, it is. It's the prequel to the films. And Disney hired me to write Captain Jack's backstory, just like I was hired by Lucasfilm to write Han Solo's backstory, and Paramount to write Sarek's backstory. You know, that's Spock's dad. And so I've kind of become the go-to person for backstory on these characters. Yeah. I guess it's because I can play reverse dominoes and look at a character who is, you know, here and go, okay, ding, 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 how did they get there? And kind of extrapolate backwards, so to speak, to see how that character developed and became the person he is that we see in the films or the television show or whatever. And so I was tickled to get the assignment, and it took me 3 whole years to write it. And I had to do a lot of research, because way more than I've ever done before. Because let's face it, even when you're talking a universe as complicated as Star Wars or Star Trek, it's still a universe that somebody else has created. But the Price of Freedom is set in the Pirates of the Caribbean universe, which is nominally at least set in our own history and of this planet, this world. And so you have the whole of Earth's history to draw on, sort of, because it's actually kind of an alternate history. It's not quite the same as our world, but because magic works, and there's you know, undead pirates walking around, and you know, women growing to 50 feet high in front of your eyes, and then turning into multitudes of little crabby things. And all these
little things like that,
little
but that
things
happens
like
every
that,
day.
yeah, and krakens dragging ships under and whatnot. Yeah. So, but
now, one neat thing was,
it was a fun assignment, but it was a lot of work.
Yeah. Now, when you first started writing this, the third movie had been written, correct?
Oh yes, the script for At World's End had been written, and it was in production. Just about the time they started talking to me, the movie was actually finishing up, and by the time that I was getting ready to sign the contract, or just after I had signed the contract, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement because they sent me the script so I could read it and use that to work towards, in pushing the dominoes over backwards, so to speak, and in coming up with the backstory. So that was very interesting. And my editor came down to Washington, D.C., and we spent a whole weekend just, tossing ideas around and everything. And then I had to sit there and put this hodgepodge of things and try to make an outline of it, which actually got rejected. And I had a couple of outlines go through, and the studio liaisons, kept saying, move it back further. We want him younger. We want him younger. So finally we got back to the point where Jack in the book is, in the flashback sequences, he's 20, and then in the actual main story sequence, he's 25.
Right.
So he's pretty young.
Yeah, and so it is, in a way, because you have the flashbacks in it, it's a pretty good-sized book. So it's
really, a big book. It's
really kind of like 2 books in one, really.
674 pages long or something like that, and it's a big book. So it's the equivalent of 2 regular-sized books, because they kept saying, well, why don't you add in some more here to the flashback parts so that there would be more pirates in it? Because actually in The Price of Freedom, Jack is an honest merchant seaman. And he's a first mate on a brig called the Fair Wind, and he's working for the East India Trading Company. And guess who's just about to arrive in Africa to take over as the manager of that area? Cutler Beckett. Mm-hmm. So Jack winds up working for Cutler Beckett, who is the person who first gives him his first ship as a captain. And that's what Jack really wanted. He wanted to be Captain Jack Sparrow. Yes. And so the two of them kind of, have a lot of interaction and how they first met. And then there's the flashback sequences to Shipwreck Cove, and we get to see what Jack's life was like living with the pirates in Shipwreck Cove, and where he first met, for example, Hector Barbosa.
Right.
And
some of Barbossa's crew. You brought in a lot of the characters that are in the movies. There's Barbosa, some of the crew is in there.
Well, just Pintel and Rigetti,
Yeah.
really. The kind of clowny guys, and the one with the wooden eye that popped out and everything. And so yes, I did have they both had brief cameos, but mainly it was Barbosa.
And Teague's in it.
Yeah, Teague's in it, that's right. Well, Teague, Jack has a relationship with Teague that is a little fraught, shall we just say. And he's kind of undergoing his post-teenage rebellion, and his idea of post-teenage rebellion is, I'm going to go straight. I'm not going to be a pirate. I'm going to be an honest merchant sailor, and then I won't have to worry about getting hanged, which, Jack made it pretty clear he really did not want to get hanged.
Yeah, I don't understand.
I don't, well, he really...
Little quirk.
Yeah.
So one thing I liked in the book is he's a, merchant seaman working for East India Corporation. And you did not skirt around the fact that a large part of the trade going on then was the slave trade.
Yes.
A lot of this takes place in Africa, in a town called Calabar.
That's right.
Which was a real place.
Which was a real place. Mm-hmm.
And you tried to do research on it, as I understand.
Yeah, well, I never could find like any kind of a plat or plans for Calabar or how it was arranged or anything. So in the end, I had to make it up. But most things, I did find good historical research on it. And like, for example, I had to learn all about, and I was lucky to have a couple of very good nautical type advisors. And I had to learn a lot about sailing a square rigger, how you actually sailed a square rigger. And for example, I spent quite a while trying to figure out whether Jack would have used what's called a backstaff or an octant, because it was way too early for a sextant. And yes, I can tell you those things with authority. And finally, I decided to fudge a little bit and have him use an octant, because a backstaff is very, I just didn't think I could explain it. But octant, I figured people could derive that this was related to a sextant, and in determining navigation. And of course, Jack has to navigate. And and his first cargo that he's carrying, by the way, ironically, for the East India Trading Company, is rum.
And Jack just loves his rum.
Yes, he does. But he's actually put in the uncomfortable position of having to go after the crew that has stolen some of the rum. So I got to have him say, "Why is the rum gone?" And the rum is gone. Why is the rum gone? So that was fun. One
of the interesting things in the book is Jack is not the only point of view character in it.
No.
You bring in another character throughout most of the book. She's known as Aisha.
Yes, she actually, since the slave trade and the East India Company would have been heavily involved in that, because everybody was. It was the most lucrative trading that any cargo you could ship was slaves. And so since Jack was in Africa and trading out of Calabar in those days, and that's where they told me to set the story. They didn't actually specify Calabar, but the western coast of Africa, that's what was going on. It was called the Slave Coast, and so that's what I had to deal with. And the fact is that Jack runs afoul of the slave trade, but he doesn't want to get involved. Jack's basically at heart a good man. So of course something in him revolts at the idea. And there actually was a line in the movie scripts that I read when I told you they gave me the scripts to read, and I had to sign a special, permission and stuff to read it ahead of time, where he turned to Cutler Beckett at World's End, and for some reason the line was cut, and says, "Human beings aren't cargo, mate." So I gave him that line in my book because Jack did not want to deal with slaves. He did not want to sail in a slave ship. And actually, smart captains, I found this out historically, did not want to, it was very, very dangerous, not just because of the dangers of a slave revolt, but because of pestilence. There were many times when a slave ship would come in and not only a third of the slaves would have died, but a third of the crew would have perished in the voyage because of the terrible conditions, and sickness just ran rampant. And the sailors would catch it too.
And you talk about the slave trade and the slaves and what it was like, because
it was extremely grim.
Becomes a slave.
That's right. Yeah, she goes from being a princess to a slave.
Yes, and because it wouldn't be Pirates of the Caribbean without treasure hunts and hidden magical islands.
That's right. There certainly is plenty. Aisha does have magical powers, and she's and there is treasure, heaps and heaps and heaps of treasure, which of course makes Jack's eyes light up and him determined to go after it. So it's and to keep Cutler Beckett from finding out where it is, because that of course is where the nature of the game is. You how much can you get away with? And this is still Jack, even though he's a younger, somewhat more vulnerable Jack, who hasn't learned to be a little more naive. You see him get kicked around a little bit, and so he learns. He kind of learns that you got to protect number one first.
But it still is Jack. That's one of the things I liked about it. Is while he was younger, a little more naive, a little not as wise in the ways of the world. You still see that Jack Sparrow we love from the movies in there, and you see it coming out more and more. You see where he learned to put the coal around his eyes.
Oh yeah, that was fun
like
writing those things, and how he got to be so charming with the ladies. Of course, the ladies love Jack, and why shouldn't they? And also, the most challenging thing for me in writing the book was coming up with Jack's dialogue, because of course the way Johnny Depp worked on the character and the way they wrote the character for him once he had developed the character, because the character when they first wrote him was just kind of an ordinary pirate figure, and then Johnny Depp shows up one morning with his teeth all gold and silvered and coal around his eyes and says and then
here it is,
and they went, is he drunk, is he what? What is he doing? And then, of course, everybody loved the character, so he was given quite a free hand to develop him more. But Jack's dialogue can be just a real challenge, because he frequently says things that are half the opposite of what he means, and he loves big fancy words and throwing them at people to confuse and befuddle them. And that was a lot of fun, but it also was a challenge, because when you're writing dialogue for Han Solo, he sounds like a regular guy. Jack doesn't sound like anybody else. Nobody else talks
just
like that.
Like Jack.
Yeah.
And I think that I like that in the book. You could see a younger Johnny Depp saying those lines.
I did watch. I have to admit, I watched quite a few episodes of 21 Jump Street to see how the younger Johnny Depp looked and moved and stuff like that. I'd seen What's Eating Gilbert Grape and some of his really early movies.
Great stuff, by the way.
And he immerses himself into a role, but I wanted to see what he moved like when he was, moving quickly and running and chasing down miscreants. So 21 Jump Street was very useful to me. Now, I'd never seen it before, so thank goodness for Hulu. Yeah.
Hulu is your friend.
That's right.
Now, the secret island in this is Zerzura?
Zerzura, that's right.
And that, I found out, is an actual, real, legendary city?
Well, real legendary city.
Yeah, you know what I mean? It's like...
There is a real legend about a place called Zerzura, and it's the place of the little birds, and it's close to the Arabic word zarzar, which means sparrow. Isn't that nice? It's like it was meant, isn't it? So it's like place of the little birds, i.e. sparrow. And so when I read that legend, and they were saying put the story in Africa, the studio people were saying, move it back further in time and make Jack younger and put it in Africa, I was like, that would be a fun legend to play with and to have Jack get involved, because there's, the legend of the king and queen of Zerzura, and they're asleep on their thrones, and some evil spell put them to sleep, and there's heaps of treasure all around, and I was like, well, this is right up Jack's alley. So I just kept on inventing there, and of course, instead of putting the location of Zerzura as an oasis, I I just decided, well, it'll be an island off the
Because he
west
has
coast.
to sail to it.
That's right. He's
Jack's
gotta
not going to go overland to an oasis in the
Well,
desert.
I think he would go almost anywhere for treasure, but,
yeah.
but we had to have the ships in there.
And you had
That's
to be
right.
a lot of treasure.
Oh yes, it was a lot of treasure. There was, well, of course.
And you know, traps and you know all the great stuff we expect.
Fun critters that you know are out to kill you and things like that. You know, magical illusions and you know, and evil people and evil critters and all that stuff.
And good heroic people and
Yes, some of them were very good and heroic and all that sort of stuff.
And I have to say, Aisha I found to be an absolutely fascinating character.
Thank you. I really enjoyed creating her, and it was one of the things that I really enjoyed was creating the system of magic that she used, where her magic was linked to fabric and weaving and sewing and things like that, because I got to do research to find out like what kind of needles they used in England in an English household in circa 1700 and the early 1700s anyway, and that and I found out, and I had to do so much research for this book, and it was fascinating to know what kind of fabrics they had and everything, and I'd never done a system of magic in any of my other books that was anything like this. But I had a good time creating the weaving as a magical thing, and of course it worked in very nicely for that to let us know where Jack got that
little waist thing he wears around his waist.
Yeah,
You cover where
that
a lot
sash
of
he wears.
where a lot of his costume came from,
Yeah.
and where the makeup came from, and you cover you know where he got the black pearl and how he got the black pearl, and how you know we all know the deal with Davy Jones.
Yep,
That's in the movies,
well,
and where that came from.
Yeah, I was basically told, you know, to put us to the point where you know he's the recognizable Jack that we know, and so I was like, so you can see him as Jack becoming, and so that's what I did.
Well, it's a fun book. It's a great read, and it moves like a good movie. It's a
Oh, good.
It's a
Well,
really
thank you.
good
I'm
book.
so glad you liked it, Mike.
And we're out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming back, and come back another time.
Oh yeah, sure. I'll be happy to.
Okay, great. Well, that's it for this episode, and for all of us here at Fast Forward, this is Mike Zipser saying, take care.